Well, our topic today is pretty fascinating. You're still looking, aren't you, John? He's going to put me in there before I'm done. We're going to talk about something a little different today. We're going to talk about beekeeping. And so our guest today is John Nenninger from the Jefferson County Beekeepers Association. We were talking over lunch. John has an interesting background. He has a degree in mathematics, computer science, a minor in education, and an MBA. His interest in beekeeping stretches back to 1968, which I remember anyway, when his relatives farmed in Iowa. Following his time in the service, John was reintroduced to beekeeping in 1974 during a genetics class. After building a passive solar house and finishing his garden, John was able to get back into beekeeping and has always wanted to include bees and a greenhouse on his property. Beekeeping also made John aware of the importance of other native pollinators and the need for better habitat. Recent developments in beekeeping motivated him to try to do more research by obtaining grants from the USDA, and he is now in the process of finishing those research projects. John is certified to perform instrumental insemination with bees and has been a guest speaker at the Heartland Apiary Society and is involved in testing small hive beetle prevention at the Missouri Botanical Gardens. Some of the topics John's going to touch with us today include colony collapse disorder, or CCD, beekeeping, pre and post 1980s, pests and mites, habitat, honeybee versus native pollinators, current research, and backyard beekeeping. So if you will, help me welcome John Nenninger.
Well, thanks for giving me this opportunity to come and speak to a group. This is something I really like to talk about, and I'm hoping that it's going to be entertaining and informative. We're going to basically start off by, bees surviving in spite of man, colony collapse disorder. In this cartoon, this was on a magazine in 2009. At that time, you can see the diversity of individuals with their horrendous ideas of what caused CCD. One of them is even down here in the bottom, cell phone. I just don't understand why a beekeeper would want to go and give a cell phone to 40,000 women living in a box. Okay, if you're going to talk about CCD, you're going to have to cover the history of viruses in the industry, timelines, the pests and mites that have developed over the years, bee breathing and genetics. How did that have an impact on CCD? How does it have an impact on future beekeeping? And then you got, very important, is bee nutrition, the habitat and the losses that have been contributed to bees just by the habitat alone. Then you got bee management. You have to have the individual beekeeper being aware of what's going on with that bee. What is CCD? Well, in 2006, that's when it got its name. However, it had to happen prior to that. You just can't find it today, give it a name, and go on. It had to be occurring somewhere else prior to it. 2009, they were saying it was pathogen loads were really high in the hives, and that's what was causing all the problem. 2010, they switched to over 121 different chemicals are used out there that could have had some effect on CCD. 2012, is that for me? No. In 2012, they identified 3 viruses along with the Varroa destructor, a little insect that sucks out the blood. They have also said it's microfactorial, thank you, where they still don't know what the causes are, but they still think it's open to a lot of other interpretations. Currently, however, it's supposed to be on a decline. 2 great benefits came out of CCD. People became aware of pollination. Before that, people just go to the store, buy something, and that was it. And new research incentives. There's been better research in the last 4, 5 years, 10 years than it has, in my opinion, prior to that. Information is also getting out there. Beekeeping was kind of classified in 2 kind of groups, the old and the new. So if you were pre-1980, beekeepers didn't really have to worry about CCD, okay? They worried about stuff that they could see, they could identify, they could look at. Chalk brew started in 63 in Europe, identified, came in 65 in the United States. It's where the little larvae actually ends up looking like a piece of chalk caused by little spores. The bees had no problem with this. They just go in there, pick that little sucker out, throw him out, and he's okay. I had some hives that had that about 4 years ago. No problem. I didn't treat it. They took care of it just fine. Greater wax moth. This is something you might, if you're trout fishermen, you probably use what they call wax worms. It's the same thing. So you have an industry creating this for one, hurting the other. Now, it originated in Asia back in 1918. They could see it. They could somehow work with it. European foul brood, that was back in 1769, way back before we started using chemicals and stuff. Bees seemed to be able to somehow deal with it. They were able to work with it. They were able to genetically adjust to it and take care of it. We have one that's called American foul brood. It mutated from the European foul brood to American. If you get the American foul brood in your hive, the USDA says, go get a tractor, dig a deep hole, take that hive, put it in a hole, take some gasoline, throw it in the hole, take a match, let that sucker burn, cover it up, don't open it back up. In Illinois this year, they're having a lot of issues with that. I talked to one of their apiary inspectors, and I'm coming up with an idea how we might be able to save the hives. It's something that they've been doing in Europe for a while. The problem, I think, with some of this foul brood stuff, they ended up starting to use a lot of antibiotics on it, thinking it's going to work. But I really believe all they did, before they could know more, of course, I'm not going to criticize them because they didn't know anything, but as they did that, they accidentally mutated it into something else. The insects are kind of changing so they can continue to live in their environment. Also, this kind of brings me up, before the viruses were actually identified, there was a lot of inappropriate use of chemicals. The beekeepers were behind that, especially the big ones. They thought, let's just throw chemicals at it and we'll take care of it. 1921, however, was a big thing that hit U.S., and that's the trachlar mite. These little tiny mites that live actually in the little wind pipes through the bee. South Carolina in 1980 lost 80% of its hives, according to their research, to trachlar mites. Florida had them, Nebraska had them, New York, North and South Dakota. Pretty disjointed territory. Why? Because the migrating beekeepers were one of the problems of taking all these diseases and spreading them around. You can actually watch, if you start to map it, you can actually map it along the highways as the diseases and stuff would start to spread. Now, they have their own financial model that they follow, different than the backyard beekeeper. Post-1980, Varroa. He's the one that's big on everybody's list this year. There's 4 cousins. The first 2 aren't too bad. You know, they're kind of like a kissing cousin. They kind of get along fine with everybody. The last one, Varroa destructor, and they gave it that name because it is a destructor. They really kind of hurt the bees. They actually attached themselves to a bee. Imagine if you took a CD, one of those little CD tribes, and you put it on your back. That's in proportion to the size of that bug, that mite, to that bee. And he's sucking your blood out all the time, but you cannot replace your blood. Our bodies can, bees can't. They just keep sucking it out, sucking it dry. It was in Asia in 1904, hit Europe, hit Maryland. But in Florida again, way down here, and Wisconsin, way up there, that's when they finally recorded it in 1987, okay? A lot of lost opportunities and time to put programs in place to prevent the spreads of these diseases. Again, what they end up doing, let's just throw some chemicals at it, see what happens. There's chemicals out there that they say you should use that you actually have to use a class 3 rubber glove, respirators, stand up wind, and don't let the chemical get into the water. Personally, I wouldn't even buy it. You know, it's like, why do you want to do that? Small hive beetles, post-1980. This is where I just finished up working on a 3-year grant from the USDA. They originated in Africa, and of course, as soon as they started up here, they started to use chemicals. One process they used, they said, well, they like to hide in little crevices. So they would take a piece of cardboard, take off the lower part, put the chemical underneath it, and they would hope that the small hive beetle would run through that little hole, picking up this chemical, and then he would run back out the other end. And what is he doing? He's running all over the hive until he finally allegedly dies, okay? Currently, there's 18 viruses they looked at that could be contributing to it. Some of them was identified in 1980, some in 1990, and sock brew was way back in 1917. So they knew that there was some stuff going on. There's one that's called Arkansas bee virus. I read about very little bit on it, and Berkeley bee virus from California. I don't know, what they were doing out there. Again, they're trying to throw too many chemicals out there. Currently, though, in the last handful of years, they finally realized that the bees have their own ability to defend themselves against viruses. Now, when we go out there and, I'm sure that all the people in the past, if they knew this about the bees, they wouldn't have been doing all this chemical stuff in the past. So we interfered with that idea. We started throwing too many chemicals out there, and just because we're all chemical-based units, the bees, us, we're all powered by the same thing, the sun. So we interfered with the bees' ability to do their own little thing. Pre and post, Nosema. It's like a diarrhea for bees. After they identified to try to treat Nosema apis, Nosema sorrentis came up. This one is really hitting the bees hard. Sometimes if you have bees and you go out there and you take a look, and you can look at all these, look like a bunch of little brown marks on the side of the hive. That's actually the bees trying to get out, and they just can't get away from the hive enough, and it's actually diarrhea on the hive. They contribute this finally to poor nutrition, which is habitat, and the residues of chemicals left over. Currently, there's like 4 chemicals that seem to be used by the bee industry that you can find in all the wax on honey, and 4 that are used in the ag industry, okay? Now, they've also felt, because of these chemicals, they gave the bees lost their resistance of dealing with Nosema. Sometimes you can over-medicate, just like we can get over-medicated. In 1981, they have identified virus X and Y. I have no clue what X and Y is. It was just in all my reading material. I don't know what happened to it. I hope they find out, and maybe it's actually one of the other already 18 they have identified. Now, how does breeding interfere, if it interferes at all? So let's do a little history here. Started in 1700, people wanted to know how the bees really worked. Back then, they were thinking that there was a king and a queen and everything was taken care of in the hive. And the king thought that was really neat because he thought he was a stud, okay? And the king has to be in charge. So they ended up finally realizing through many trials and errors that, hey, no, she mates with a group of bees at one time. She does not want to mate with the drones in a hive. Okay. In 1983, they said, hey, let's see if we can kind of control this. So Germany tried to come up and try to do artificial insemination with a device they called an artificial penis. I would love to see how they did that back then. Watson, 1927, actually is the one that came up with the first instrument that you can use. It's similar to a design that one I am using today, okay? It's really, when the first time you think you can't do it, then you look underneath the microscopes and have all those little knobs. That's a great science to mess with. Now, in 1980s, people were trying to get the bees to be more, hey, lay back, like they didn't want to get stung. They wanted the bees to come up and show you where the silverware was at. And they wanted a lot of production. Okay, that's good. You can see if you can do that with the bees. But what are you losing? What did you lose? A lot of bees lost their ability for things we just don't know about. Last summer, I had an opportunity to get a swarm, a very tiny little swarm. And I put them in a little tiny box. And I went out there a couple days later, and they were all clustered in the corner. And I was thinking, what's going on? Why are they all in that corner? Well, in this box, it was a double screen. You had the area. So I kind of pushed the bees back. I wanted to know what's going on, what's happening. Well, there's about 4 or 5 small hive beetles in that corner. All these bees were trying to get to that small hive beetle. As part of my study, I was going, yes, there's some good characteristic traits here I like to have. I was concerned because the bees were such a small amount, it was too late in the year, they all died off. But that's the trait we're kind of looking for. We want to find a bee that kind of goes out there and defends itself. You don't want Africanized bees because they defend everything. You don't want them. Stay away from them. Now, you got a lot of inbreeding. I talked to a guy about 4 years ago at a conference, and he was so convinced that he was going to do what they do in the cattle industry or dog industry or whatever. He was going to take his queens and just keep on innovating them in that same hive. Another professor was trying to talk to him about it, and then the guy finally told what state he was from, and we kind of said, okay. We just walked away. You know, he just was so brothers and sisters thing. Open breeding, okay? If you go out, and a problem they have with a lot of these breeders, they go out and get this magnificent bee, a Minnesota hygienic, or a buckfast bee, okay? A special breed of bee, really top of the line. They bring that bee back to their place in Texas. They take that bee, make a bunch of daughters. The daughters, they make into queens. They take those queens and say, go out. The bee wants to go out and multiply. She's going to mate with anywhere from 20 to 40 drones. But you have no clue who that 20 and 40 drones are. And if you got killer bees in that area, she probably might mate with one. I had a hive that every so often was very testy. And I just left them alone. Over time, it worked its way out, okay? So if a queen mates with 20 drones and only one of them is a bee with characteristics you don't want, 1/20th, all those eggs she lays in that day, 100, maybe over 1,000 eggs a day, 1/20 of them is going to have that characteristic probability in there. So you can end up with a lot. So when I do my research in artificial insemination, I'm not looking at the queen as itself. I'm looking at the whole hive as an organism. Currently today, like I guess back in June, I went to a conference, diversify. Now all these people they looked into it and said, yes, now we have to get back into diversify. We have to start diversifying our bees, okay? There's now some good studies are coming out. They have shown that the semen in the drone, even over the lifespan of that drone, deteriorates in time, okay? And it's caused by temperature. I did a paper in college in the 70s on radioactivity and gene mutation, and this kind of supports what I was kind of talking about, how temperature has an effect on the gene splicing that goes on inside in our organisms. They're trying to store semen. They're trying to see if they can keep it longer. Currently, if you take semen that's 2 weeks or younger, and it's 50% dead, you can take that, inseminate it into queens, and still get a good laying queen. They're going to have a hard time with this storage of semen. If in the critter itself, the semen deteriorates over time, by his age. There's a short window of time that the drone's really maximum. And in that critter, his own semen in his own body deteriorates. It's going to be pretty hard for us to kind of do that, get over it, U of I has now started to study bees with little radio chips on them. Currently, one of their studies they have found is that the bees will go out and the bees will all start working. Some work better than others. If you take the good workers away, the bad workers will kind of pick up, okay? So it's just the start of good things to come. They could probably take the same information like they did in England, where they were taking bees, and the bees knew exactly where to go, okay, back to the hive. They gave it a little drug, a little chemical that was used in farmers and stuff. Bee couldn't find her way. It interferes with their ability to actually use their gene activities because it's being deterred by the diet. And that's something that U of I has also been doing. U of I really like U of I for this kind of research. They got a great facility out there that they're studying. Bee losses. How many bee losses can we actually say with CCD? Before CCD, 15 to 20% was normal, okay? We went from 5 million to 2.5 million hives since 1940, okay? 2006, 2013, on the average, was 33% losses, and only 1/3 of that is credit to CCD. Let's work on the other 2/3. Let's see what's happening, okay? 2012 year, it dropped. 2013 year, it went up because of the cold snap we had. A lot of beekeepers ended up keeping their hives in those tiny little boxes and didn't go out there and do anything to it. I went out and I actually insulated my boxes. I never had any bees lost. I had 6 hives. They all swarmed. I had 7 swarms from these hives, but I couldn't do anything because it was 3 days after I had my heart surgery. I just watched them all fly off. Nothing I could do. They say honey production is up 5% to 47 pounds. In 1923, you got over 200 pounds. I don't consider that an improvement, okay? However, also with this 47 pounds, if you had 5 hives, 2 of them died, the other 3 produced, and when you have too many hives in one location, they're all trying to compete for that same clover. You can have too many hives in one spot, and this gets in your way, okay? You have a maximum you can produce in any geographical region, okay? In the city of Chicago, yes, you have 80 to 120 homes on a city block, and everybody wants a better garden than their neighbor. And the bees go, yes, okay? The city has also took habitat along the river, Chicago River, converted it back into native Illinois prairie land, okay? There was a grade school, took half of its playground, dug it up, and now has it in habitat. What we must do, we have to have a national apiary law. Missouri apiary law, I think, is like 2 pages, very thin, very tiny. About 4 years ago, I tried to write one. I talked to all the states around us that have really good ones. They offered whatever assistance you want, we'll give it to you. I sent in my rough copy to the 6 representatives. I guess they got it lost in the email. I haven't heard back. I'll probably wait a bit and try to reintroduce it again. We also have to have a national habitat improvement program. Currently, with the Obama plan, the 5 states, North Dakota, South Dakota, Michigan, those up there, got $5 million to improve the habitat. I would like to see us to get about $1 million of that. Somehow we have to get that attention to get it down in here. The USDA has a habitat program. We'll pay up to 80% improving your land. I'm currently working with them on a program. Missouri Department of Conservation, same thing. Jennifer will come out, look at your land, help you. We'll tell you where to go. We'll even give you forms to fill out for grant, okay? There are things we can do out there. Every time when I walk by and I see fields of cedar, they're all about the same height. That tells me through ecological succession that probably 15 years ago, that was probably a field and the farmer didn't want to farm it anymore or put anything in. So what happens? All these cedars get in and they do it. Common sense logical conservation. Another example was when I was working with a company and he had 400 acres. I was going, great. I approached the company. I said, here's what I want to do. They said, oh yeah, we want to improve. We're doing that in Europe. We want to do it here. We found out that that 400 acres was in a conservation easement program from an organization in California. They said, Mr. Nenninger, yes, you can go out and spend $3,000 to improve that land, to put it in all these wildflowers and clover and stuff, but you cannot go on it again. And you cannot put bees on it, because bees were not native to North America. And I'm kind of just going, okay, well, you know, apricots, apples, peaches, plums, watermelon, cantaloupe, almonds, cherries, they're not native to North America either. Most of the stuff we brought over from the Middle East or Europe to this country, squash, family, you know, like pumpkins and stuff, native, and blueberries are native, okay? Now, backyard beekeeper can do more than the big commercial jobs, because the big commercial jobs, their intent is financial model is different. Like, they will spread that disease. They really don't want, they will do the minimum because it's going to cut in their cost. They will sell you equipment that they know that have diseases in it. Because what they want, they got to get that, you know, $100. Okay, they need that little stuff. Backyard beekeeper, you can control that hive. You can use non-chemical processes like I'm currently developing on how to control it with small hive beetles. Missouri Botanical Garden has a good example of that. What am I doing? I'm currently testing a pollen feeder for my USDA study. I have the prototype at home. I just have to wait until the springtime to stick it out there in that hive and see if it's going to help. I'm trying to create an external trap to catch wax moths and small hive beetles, non-chemical, okay? I'm taking, right now I got all this foam sitting in my, I guess my entranceway in my house, that I'm going to be taking this fall and I'm going to be wrapping my hives up in it and also test it itself, and I'm going to be putting these little microchips in the hive. We're also going to get a little camera. We're going to walk in there during the wintertime and see this theory of clustering, where bees have to cluster together. We are making those bees cluster. They don't really want to cluster. We're doing it, okay? Test habitat, I'm currently working with a company. Hopefully, we're going to have 80 acres that we can do it. I'm still looking for land where we can do these studies on. I want to create, locally here in Jefferson County, a bee habitat native pollinator research facility. Earlier this year, I talked to CEMO, to their geneticists down there, their biologists down there, and we're kind of waiting to get the approval from the company and work out all the little details on it. Again, the government wants us to do this improvement. Instrumental insemination, this year I didn't do it. Last year I actually got trained by Susan Colby, one of the leaders in North America. By selectively taking, what I'm going to do is my Big Bang theory. I'm going to go to Chicago. I'm going to get all these drones. I'm going to go to Kansas City, wherever. I am going to take this and I'm just going to throw them all in a bucket and I'm going to say, okay, queens, tell me what you're going to do. I want to see if I can find a trait. As doing this, if I can develop a queen, this company that I'm working with has the right to name them. That's part of the deal. You give me the land, you do this, you let me do this, I develop a new queen, you can call it Fred if you want to. Questions? Yes, sir?
Have you had any experience working with the Farm Bureau?
Actually, I tried to buy a farm through them is the only thing, and I wasn't qualified.
Oh.
That's the only thing. No, otherwise I've been doing everything with USDA and Missouri Department of Conservation. I have made the contacts. I feel very comfortable with them, and they know me on my first name basis, and I know them, so I feel at ease with them. Okay. Questions? Yes, sir.
Back in the middle 30s, we lived on a farm, and we had a big orchard. And my grandmother always had at least 10 to 12 hives of bees. I don't know what happened with them in there. All at once, they just went to die off, every one of them.
Yeah. Well, I had a case, that could have been back in the 30s, been sprayed. You know, people were just, you know, back then, we were not careful enough. Our species jumps into something, just like this idea that who in the world ever came up with the idea of a cell phone? Let's think about this, okay? So a lot of times we tend to wait, we see something occurring, we just go, and then we jump into it without kind of going, well, let's do a study here. Let's logically take steps to find out what's the cause. And a lot of times when we've gone into a problem, environmental-wise, we did more harm than good after a while. I had hives, 2 of my hives over the last 5 years. I went there and there was no bees. And I'm going, However, in both of those hives, for whatever reason, the bees did not want to put the honey up higher. They kept on squeezing the queen out. Eventually, there was only a little tiny spot. So then they just finally all left. Now, that characteristic traits in those bees, for what reason was those bees not wanting to go up higher and do it? I don't know, but I had 2 of them. And that's the only thing I saw. No dead bees, no nothing, just like you would find in CCD, but maybe that was something in that bee genetic line that they were acting that way. Yes?
How far from the hives do the bees travel?
Well, they will travel, they said, up at least 2 miles, okay? Now, what I'm trying to do is like put the hives here and the flowers right next door, because I kind of equate it to like, let's say we all had to walk to Walmart to get our food. If we walked, how long will it take us to get there? How much food can we carry back? How much food are we going to eat to stay alive to make the next trip? Same thing with bees. So if you take a bee, and that bee, she's working her little wings off. She really wants to make that hive great. She's going to fly, and she's going to go there, and she's going to get there, and she's going to fly back, and she might make 10 trips and dies. If she was right here, she'd make 100 trips and maybe would last longer. Generally, the worker bee, the women, that has something to do with work and women, but they ended up, they will last about 4 weeks. Drones, 1 season or until they mate. So don't think you guys got it nice, because as soon as you mate with that queen, the queen will take your testicles and let you go. Okay? So it's not good to be a drone. All right? Any other questions? Yes?
Well, my bees, this first year, it seemed like bees were early in the spring, they just circle and go, and you never see where they were going. They were just going real high, real quick.
Yeah.
But later on in the last, like in August, when all them bees were in my clover, in my yard,
Yes.
it's like maybe it was so hot that they didn't want to travel far anymore, they wanted to travel closer.
Well, bees are stupid. Really, okay? I have, just on the side of my house, I got a little garden. And like right now, I have a lot of goldenrod coming up. I have never seen a bee on any of that goldenrod out there. The bee, when that bee fly up and go in that direction because someone told her to go, she ends up, says, hey, looks like the right spot, She'll do her little bee stuff, go back and say, hey, this is where I found it. Now, if you have 40, 50,000 workers in there, that bee will go into that hive, and she's only going to communicate to that small group. Everybody in that hive doesn't know everything from that first bee. They don't have bee net in there, okay? They won't know what's going on. So bees will fly there, fly here, and that's good. Because you don't want all the bees to go to one spot, and they just won't do it. They kind of interact with their environment. They will kind of go, hey, let's go there, okay? And then like in your case, like right now, some of my bees, when the bees finally come out and they want to go on their first flight, out of the hive, they would come out of the hive and they kind of just fly all over the hive, and you got maybe 1,000 bees. Well, those 1,000 bees probably all came out 2 days ago, out of their little emergent, and now they're finally flying around, and they'll go back in the hive and, kind of sit around, and then later on they'll go out and go through their stages of work, responsibility, and eventually comes a forager, okay? My bees, they're at my front door. The UPS driver and FedEx says they are at my front door, and they will stop over there. They're about from here to the wall. I got stung yesterday by a wasp, but not by a bee. So I am starting to declare war on wasps this weekend. Any other questions? I got a question, okay? Could CCD be a virus by itself? Something we haven't identified yet. There's more stuff we don't know than we do know. When we go out and we look at stuff, it's how do we know what we're seeing? And so some scientists or biologists or geneticists goes out and says, hey, let's see if we can come up with a new test for something different and see. CCD is on the decline. How many of these other viruses have been around? How many, like they have found in Europe that some of these viruses on the SEMA are in their hives and the bees are fine. Okay? Europe has different policies than we do. I was over there last year ago, June and July, talking to beekeepers for 3 weeks. Different ideas. Some of them I like to use. One thing I found out I cannot do, it's not politically correct, is when they're spinning their honey and I say, hey, can I try that? They did not like that. So you have to wait. They'll give you a little spoon to try it. You know, I guess they were afraid I was double dipping with my finger. But, you know, but that was it. Any other questions, concerns, comments, recommendations? How many of you guys have bees? All right.
My son has a couple of acres.
Yeah.
And he grows clover.
Right.
And a while back I was there, and you couldn't hardly walk in there.
Yeah.
Because it was just loaded. So I told him, I guess there's a hive somewhere.
Right.
How close would that hive have been?
Well, it could be a feral bee. Some bees living up in a tree that got away from somebody. Could be 20 yards from you and you won't see it. Or it could be up to a mile away, 2 miles away. So it really is hard to tell.
Yeah, he has a lot of woods behind him.
Yeah. So, you know, bees will prefer living up in a tree 20, 30 feet instead of a little tiny box. We put them on the ground.
Yeah,
So,
it was just
yeah.
full of bees. It was great.
Yeah. I had a plum tree earlier this year that I walked back and that thing was buzzing. If it wasn't anchored onto the ground, I think it would have got up and fly away. I had so many plums in that tree, the 2 limbs on the left just broke off. Okay? Do you know that every 1 grain of pollen is needed for every seed in a plant? So if you have a cucumber that grows this way and then turns, that's because it's poor pollination. You don't have good pollination. They have also found that if you diversify with wildflowers and plants next to your fields, diversify, that brings in more different kinds of variety of bees, pollinators, your crops will go up 20 to 30% because of all that extra interactions going on. Okay? If you have a watermelon that's partly deformed, that's because those bees could not get to it that early in the morning. The flower opens up, it has to get worked on. If it doesn't, that flower goes away. You have to wait until the next flower, okay? This year I had acre squash. I wanted to try it. I put 4 seeds in the ground. It took over my entire yard. I got 2 watermelons this year. I had a handful of cantaloupe. The possum had some. I guess the raccoon might have been in there one night. But I got to have those pollinators out there to do it. If you don't do it, you're not going to work. Somebody says, could we exist if all the bees went away? Yes, but you won't have honey. If all the bees went away by unnatural means, meaning chemicals, we put it on the bees, we're going to be putting it on all the other native pollinators. They die, we die. Okay? Sometimes I look upon ourselves as a big parasite on the earth, ourselves. So we have to work for it. Any other questions? If somebody asks the right question, I'll see if I can get you to win a car. Any other questions, concerns, comments? I guess that's it. We're done. Thank you very much. Thank you.